I always thought rock bottom would come with a bang. Some kind of explosion, maybe, or a dramatic moment in the pouring rain where someone yells, "Get out," and slams a door. But for me, it came on a warm Wednesday afternoon in Elyria, Ohio. The sun was out, the lawn had just been mowed, and my dad, David Moore, asked me to come downstairs like he was inviting me to dinner. I was 12, still had posters of superhero movies on my bedroom wall, still believed my parents were basically good people who loved me and my older sister equally. That belief ended that day. I walked into the living room barefoot, holding a half-eaten granola bar, and there they were. David in his usual polo shirt tucked too neatly into his jeans, and Cynthia Mom with her hands folded tightly in her lap. They looked like people waiting to be interviewed, not like parents about to say something that would break their son. "Sit down," Eli David said, motioning to the chair across from them. His voice was clipped businesslike. No warmth, just get on with it. My stomach tightened, and I sat suddenly aware that I hadn't brushed my hair that morning. Cynthia inhaled like she was bracing for impact. "Sweetie," she began with that fake sympathy smile that made me feel like I was a problem she couldn't fix. "We've been going through some changes." "Changes," I echoed, trying to keep my voice calm, my hands still. "Like what?" David leaned forward. "We've hit a rough patch financially. We've decided temporarily you'll be staying with another family for a while." I blinked. "What?" "We just need a little time," Cynthia added quickly, "to sort things out. You know how things are with money right now?" No, I didn't. Just last week they'd bought my sister Haley a brand new MacBook for school. I was still using a hand-me-down Chromebook that crashed every time I opened more than 2 tabs. "Why not Haley?" I asked, not even thinking. "Why am I the one leaving?" Cynthia's smile faded. "Haley's about to enter AP classes. She needs stability. And I don't—" My voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't care. David's eyes hardened. "This isn't a debate, Eli. We're doing what's best for everyone." No, they were doing what was easiest for them. That much I understood immediately, even if I didn't yet know how deep their betrayal would go. The next day, they packed my duffel bag like I was going on a sleepover. 1 pair of jeans, 3 t-shirts, a hoodie that still smelled like our attic, and the toothbrush I'd been using since 3rd grade. They didn't even include the comic books I kept under my mattress or the lizard-shaped keychain Haley gave me on my 10th birthday. Just the bare minimum to function. On the drive over to the Carter's house, the family that would be taking me in, nobody said a word. David drove with both hands on the wheel, like we were headed to the DMV, not dropping off his child like a piece of unwanted furniture. Cynthia kept glancing out of the window, pretending to be fascinated by strip malls and empty gas stations. When we pulled up in front of the Carter's 2-story house, Diane and Reggie were already standing outside. They looked friendly, too friendly, like people who were used to greeting broken kids at their doorstep. I stayed in the car for a second staring at the dashboard, begging for some kind of last-minute miracle. Maybe they'd realize they'd made a mistake. Maybe they'd take me home. Maybe they actually loved me. David opened the back door. "Let's get this over with." No miracle then. Cynthia knelt in front of me once I stepped out. "This isn't goodbye, Eli. It's just a pause. You'll see." She kissed my forehead, but it felt cold like static from an unplugged TV. David shook my hand. They turned and got in the car, and just like that I watched them drive away without looking back. The red taillights disappeared down the block, and it hit me, really hit me, that they weren't coming back. Not tomorrow, maybe not ever. That first night with the Carters was a blur of unfamiliar smells, lemon-scented dish soap, maple syrup, laundry detergent that didn't smell like home. Diane made pancakes for dinner like that was supposed to fix something. I ate in silence, barely tasting anything. Reggie asked if I liked sports. I shrugged. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, I just got dumped by my parents like expired milk. Maybe later. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the unfamiliar whir of a ceiling fan above me. Every few seconds it clicked, like it was about to fall. That would have been fine. I was numb. Not sad, not angry, just emptied out like someone had scooped the inside of me with an ice cream scoop and left the shell. The next morning, I expected a call, or a message, maybe even a crappy email. Nothing. By the end of the week, I stopped waiting. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, when I Googled my parents on a school computer, that I found the truth. There they were on Instagram, smiling, sun-kissed, sipping cocktails on a beach in Tulum. Caption, living our dream. Finally free. In the photo, Haley stood between them, flashing her perfect braces-free smile, like this was the best thing that ever happened to her. Free. They had traded me for freedom. And that's when it started. The shift. The burn. Not just sadness, not just abandonment, something sharper, hotter, righteous. I wasn't just the kid they left behind. I was going to become the person they could never afford to face. At first, living with the Carters felt like floating in someone else's life. Their home was warm but not familiar. Their routines gentle but not mine. Diane woke up every morning at 6:00 a.m. Sharp. Her bathrobe always perfectly tied with gospel music playing low from a dusty speaker in the kitchen. Reggie made strong coffee that could wake the dead and read the sports section out loud like it was scripture. They didn't force me to talk. That was the first thing I noticed. They just let me be. My room had posters of basketball players I didn't know, and a stack of used books in the corner, mostly mystery novels and Reader's Digest magazines. Nothing screamed kid lives here. It was the kind of room that had seen other kids before me. Some probably stayed longer, others just passing through. I wasn't sure which I'd be. At school, I kept my head down. The guidance counselor introduced me to a few kids in homeroom, but I could tell by the way they looked at me, curious but distant, that they already knew. Word gets around fast when you're the foster kid. One teacher mispronounced my name as Elliot for a full week before I corrected her. It wasn't that she didn't care, she just didn't notice. But there was one person who did. Miles. He sat 2 rows behind me in English, always drawing something in the margins of his notebook. One day after class, he caught up with me near my locker and said, "You look like someone who listens to sad music on purpose." I wasn't sure if it was an insult or an invitation. I laughed anyway. Miles didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer. We bonded over shared silences and sarcasm over cheap cafeteria pizza and our mutual hatred of gym class. One afternoon, he handed me a sketchbook. "If you're not going to talk," he said, "maybe draw." I hadn't drawn anything since leaving my old house. But that night, I opened the book and just let it pour out. Sharp lines, dark ink, messy corners. A family of stick figures, 2 walking away, one left behind a speech bubble filled with static. 2 weeks later, I got called to the front office during 4th period. I thought maybe David and Cynthia had finally decided to check on me. Maybe, just maybe they'd had a change of heart. But when I opened the door, it wasn't them. It was a woman in a sleek black pantsuit with a clipboard. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "Eli Moore. I'm Rebecca. I'm with Child and Family Legal Aid. Mind if we talk for a moment?" In the conference room, she slid a document across the table. "Your birth parents have waived custodial rights. It's official. You're now a ward of the state." I stared at the paper. The words blurred. I felt like I was underwater, sound muffled blood, thick. "So, they signed me away." Rebecca nodded. "It happens. Sometimes parents feel unprepared or unwilling to continue care. This just makes it legal." I swallowed hard. Did they say why? They didn't have to. She closed the folder. "But for what it's worth, this might open doors. You can apply for tuition waivers, housing support, options that weren't there before." Options. That's what I had become. A case number with benefits. That night, I sat on the Carter's porch swing long after everyone else had gone to bed. The wind was sharp biting. The neighborhood was silent, except for the occasional bark of a dog or the hum of a faraway train. I didn't cry, not anymore, but I let the truth settle. I had been released like baggage too heavy to carry. The next morning, Reggie drove me to school early. "You good?" he asked, glancing at me as we pulled up. "Fine," I lied. He nodded like he knew it wasn't true but wouldn't push. Sometimes the people who bring you into the world aren't the ones who walk beside you in it. It stuck with me all day. Weeks passed. I started waking up earlier doing my homework without anyone telling me. Diane noticed I folded my laundry. Reggie taught me how to change a tire. I still hated gym, but I started liking art again. I even joined the yearbook committee, not because I cared about yearbooks, but because the art teacher offered free snacks and didn't ask too many questions. Then one Tuesday evening, everything cracked open again. Miles had tagged me in an Instagram story. "Isn't this your mom?" the message read. The video was short, about 15 seconds, but it burned itself into my skull. Cynthia. My mother was on a yacht, not a boat. A yacht. Wind in her hair, cocktail in hand, laughing into the camera. David sat beside her, tan and relaxed, holding up a champagne glass. Haley was in the background, dancing to some obnoxious pop song, wearing a shirt that said "Life Upgrade Activated." The caption read, "Living our truth. Toxic people stay behind." Toxic. That's what I was to them. Not a son, not even a mistake, just toxic. I felt my chest tighten, not from sadness, no, that had dried up, but from something deeper, older, angrier. I didn't say a word to Miles. I just logged off. But the next morning, I printed the screenshot, folded it twice. slid it into the sketchbook Miles gave me. I wasn't sure why, maybe to remind myself, maybe to keep the anger alive. Not the reckless kind, the kind that builds quietly, strategically. Because I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to rebuild, and they were going to see it. I didn't go looking for revenge, not at first. It wasn't some grand plan or late-night vow whispered into the darkness. It started with a filing cabinet. Diane kept old tax documents in her home office, which doubled as the guest room. I was looking for a stapler for my history project, nothing more dramatic than that. But when I pulled open the bottom drawer, I found a beige folder labeled Moore, Cynthia, and David, Legal Notice. I froze. It was one of those moments where your body moves before your brain does. My fingers opened the folder without permission. Inside was a letter from a law firm, Patterson and Blythe, Cleveland office, addressed to the Carters. It was dated a week after I moved in. The letter was short, curt, and unmistakable in tone. We trust you have accepted temporary guardianship of Elijah Moore. As stated in prior communication, the biological parents, Mr. and Mrs. Moore, are seeking to sever legal ties due to financial hardship. However, we must disclose a pending investigation regarding concealed income and undeclared offshore holdings associated with their recent self-employment status. Your cooperation with CPS and our office is appreciated. Offshore holdings, investigation. I didn't breathe for a solid 30 seconds. Financial hardship. They were on yachts, drinking imported champagne, living their truth. I slipped the folder back, careful not to crease the paper. My heart thudded like a drumline in my chest. Diane hadn't mentioned any of this. Why would she? Maybe she thought I was better off not knowing. Maybe she was right. But that night, I waited until the house was dark and quiet. Then I pulled out the Chromebook Reggie had loaned me and started digging. Turns out David had started a consulting business the year before I was sent away. Nothing specific, just a bunch of vague language about digital assets and client partnerships. His LinkedIn page was slick polished and mostly BS. Cynthia, meanwhile, had gone full-blown lifestyle influencer. She ran a blog called Untamed Horizons, filled with filtered photos and motivational captions about living free from burdens. And guess what? Neither listed me as their son. Haley was mentioned 5 times once in a sponsored post about raising resilient daughters. Me, I didn't exist. But here's where it got weird. Buried in one of Cynthia's older blog posts from just 3 weeks before I was dropped off was a photo of her and David signing a document in what looked like a private bank office. The caption read, "Big moves, big freedom. 23 is our year." I zoomed in. On the table was a folder stamped Blythe Private Holdings, Zurich branch. I felt sick. Zurich, Switzerland, offshore, the word from the letter. So they had money, not just comfortable money, hidden money, which meant the whole "we can't afford to raise you" story was garbage, a cover, a lie so lazy it didn't even try to make sense. The next day I skipped lunch and found a quiet corner in the library. Miles joined me without asking, plopping down across from me with a packet of saltines. "You look like you haven't slept in a year," he said through a mouthful of crumbs. I slid the printed screenshots across the table, the blog post, the yacht photo, the law firm letter. "I think my parents are laundering money." Miles blinked. "Whoa, okay, this escalated. I'm serious." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "That's actually insane, but it tracks. The yacht, the private bank. Why would they dump you if they had all that?" "Because I'm a liability," I said flatly. "A paper trail. One more thing that connects them to real life." Miles whistled low. "You gonna do something about it?" I didn't answer right away, but the answer was already forming, slowly, like a storm building miles offshore. That weekend, Diane asked if I wanted to help at her church's community pantry. I said yes, mostly because I needed the distraction. But after the last box of canned soup was shelved, a woman with kind eyes and curly gray hair pulled me aside. "You're Eli, right?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm Ellen. I used to be a social worker. Diane told me you're adjusting really well." I smiled, but something about her gaze felt deliberate. She reached into her tote bag and handed me a business card. "If you ever need to talk to someone off the record, I'm around. Sometimes the systems in place don't always serve the truth." The words hung in the air. I took the card, slid it into my pocket. That night, I stared at it under my reading lamp. Her words repeated in my head like a whisper, "Don't always serve the truth." Was it fate, coincidence? I didn't know. But I did know this something wasn't finished. Something was wrong. And maybe, just maybe, I had a way to expose it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. But I had no idea just how ugly the truth was going to get. The call came just after midnight. I was half asleep, one leg tangled in the blanket, the other hanging off the bed. The ringtone, a generic buzz I never bothered to change, jarred me into full awareness. I fumbled in the dark, grabbed my phone and squinted at the screen. Haley. I hadn't heard her voice in over 5 months. Not since the day she stood on the front porch with Cynthia and David looking at me like I was a stranger being returned to sender. I didn't even hesitate. I answered. Eli, her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. Please don't hang up. I didn't say anything. I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything, she rushed on. But I don't know who else to call. I think Mom and Dad are in serious trouble, and they're trying to drag me down with them. That got my attention. What kind of trouble, I asked, my voice flatter than I felt. I can't explain over the phone, she whispered. They're not here right now. They're at some client dinner in Tampa. I went into Mom's desk looking for my passport because I was thinking about running, and I found this folder. It had bank statements. One of them was in your name. My chest tightened. What? Yeah, an account in Zurich. I didn't know until now. They opened it 2 years ago. They've been using your social. It has over 70 grand in it. Silence ballooned between us. I swear, Eli. I didn't know, she said, choking on her words. I swear, but they're moving money around fast. I think they're about to leave the country. I think they're leaving me too. For a second, I forgot to breathe. They'd stolen my identity, my name, my social security number, my future. I ran a hand down my face. Why are you calling me now? Because I think you're the only person who might believe me, or care if I disappear. I couldn't argue with that. We talked in quiet tones for the next hour. Haley described documents she'd copied, routing numbers, statements, an email thread from someone named CK Holdings. She'd stashed it all in a USB drive and slipped it into the lining of her duffel bag just in case. You need to get out of that house, I told her. I know, but I don't have anyone, Eli. Not really. I paused, then said it before I could stop myself. You have me. The next morning, I met with Ellen, the retired social worker, who had given me her card. She listened carefully as I laid everything out. The folder I found, Cynthia's blog, the law firm letter, Haley's call. When I finished, she sat back slowly and folded her hands. This is more than a family matter, she said. This is fraud, identity theft, maybe worse. Can CPS do anything, I asked? Not fast enough, but the state attorney's office might. It all moved quickly after that. Ellen connected me with a contact in the Ohio Department of Justice, who advised me to keep everything backed up and logged. I uploaded the documents to a secure drive. Miles helped me set up a timeline with screenshots, dates, flagged transactions. We called it the umbrella file. At night, I texted Haley in bursts. She was scared, but she held her ground. Then 3 days after that first call, she sent me a blurry photo from inside a moving car. They're taking me to the airport. They said we're going to Costa Rica. I didn't pack anything. I forwarded the photo to Ellen. Within hours, the DOJ issued a hold on their passports. But it was too late. By the time the feds arrived at the Moore residence in Florida, the house was empty. The safe in the study was open, the closets were cleared out, and the car was gone. I paced in the Carters' living room, like I was wearing grooves into the carpet. Diane tried to keep me calm, but it was Reggie who said what none of us wanted to admit. They might get away with this. No, I said, not if Haley stops them. That night she did. At 2:17 a.m., Haley messaged me a location pin from a rest stop 20 miles outside Miami. She had faked a panic attack in the car, told Cynthia she was going to be sick, and ran for it the moment they stopped. She locked herself in a bathroom stall and called the number I gave her for Ellen's DOJ contact. They found her 20 minutes later, shaking, crying, but safe. Haley was placed into protective care immediately. The DOJ issued arrest warrants for Cynthia and David the next morning. They were officially on the run. My body couldn't decide if it was relieved or exhausted. I slept 14 hours straight the next day, dreaming in fragments, Haley's voice, the blog caption, Diane's pancakes, Zurich folders, Miles saying this escalated. When I woke up, my phone had 3 new notifications. One from Ellen, one from Haley, and one from an unknown number, a photo. It was taken from inside a car somewhere coastal Sunset. In the distance, palm trees blurred by motion. Underneath a single message, you think you've won, but we taught you better than that. And that's when I realized they weren't finished. At first, I thought the message was just another bluff, a final jab from 2 people who thrived on fear and control. But something about the phrasing "we taught you better than that" got under my skin. It wasn't just taunting, it was a warning. And it meant one thing: Cynthia and David weren't just hiding, they were planning. I didn't tell Haley about the photo right away. She was still recovering, placed in a short-term care home in Orlando, with round-the-clock supervision and a lawyer assigned through the DOJ. Her voice when we talked was lighter, hopeful even. "I got a toothbrush that isn't hotel-issued," she said one night, laughing softly. "Feels like a luxury." But behind her laugh I could hear it, the same thing I carried the weight of unfinished damage. Back in Illyria, things got weird fast. One afternoon as I was walking home from school, I noticed a black SUV idling a block from the Carter house. Windows, tinted engine running. I slowed, stared for a moment. The driver didn't move, just sat there, watching. The next day it was gone, but a week later a white sedan showed up. Then a blue pickup. Always different vehicles, same silent presence. I started texting license plates to Ellen. She promised to investigate. At school, word started spreading, whispers in the hallway. A girl in gym said, "Isn't that the kid whose parents are like international criminals or something?" A boy in algebra asked if I thought the FBI would show up during finals. Miles had to shut down a rumor on Reddit that I was part of a Netflix documentary in production. But none of that compared to what happened on a Tuesday in April. It was just past 3 p.m. when Diane got a call from the local sheriff's office. Someone had filed a formal complaint against the Carters, accusing them of child exploitation, neglect, and falsifying foster care benefits. A state investigator would be coming by within the week. My stomach dropped. The timing wasn't random. "They're trying to burn the ground under us," Reggie said as we sat in the living room that night, his knuckles clenched tight. "If they can't scare you, they'll try to discredit the people around you." Diane shook her head, her eyes glassy. "We've done nothing wrong." I felt it too, rage, frustration, helplessness. It wasn't just about me anymore. They were hurting people who had given me safety, a roof, a second chance. That's when I made the decision. "I want to go public," I said. "Tell the truth, everything, online." Diane looked stunned. "Eli, once you do that, once it's out there, you can't take it back." "I know." Reggie looked at me hard. "You sure?" I nodded. "I'm not hiding. They want silence. I'm giving them the opposite." So with Miles' help, we started recording. It was simple. Just me sitting at the edge of my bed, no filters, no edits. I told the whole story from the day they dropped me off to the hidden bank accounts, the yacht pictures, the legal folder in Diane's drawer. I showed screenshots, redacted documents, even the photo of the SUV. But what made it real, what gave it teeth, was my voice. Steady, raw, no drama, just the truth. We uploaded it under the title, "How My Parents Erased Me for Money and Why I'm Fighting Back." Within 24 hours, the video had 14,000 views. By the end of the week, it passed 500,000. Comments poured in. People shared their own stories: abandonment, financial abuse, parents who treated kids like accessories or burdens. Journalists reached out. A podcast host offered to fly me out for an interview. CPS quietly dropped a Tulsi investigation into the Carters. Haley called me sobbing. "You did it," she said. "You made people care." But something about her voice sounded off. "Are you okay?" I asked. A pause, then no. "I think someone followed me after my appointment today. A man in a baseball cap. He was pretending to read a map, but he was watching me." My chest went cold. I told my case manager. She continued. She said, "It's probably nothing but Eli. I know Mom's patterns. That's how she does it. She watches first." I hung up and called Ellen. Within the hour, Haley was moved to a secure location. The DOJ escalated the case, officially naming Cynthia and David as fugitives wanted on multiple counts: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to defraud the state, and endangering a minor. Their photos hit national news outlets. Tips came in. Leads surfaced. Still no confirmed sightings. And then just when we thought we were gaining ground, the Carter house got broken into. It happened on a Sunday. We came back from church and the front door was ajar. Nothing stolen, nothing obvious. But Reggie's desk drawers had been rifled through. The safe in the guest room had been opened. And on my bed in the center of my neatly folded blanket was a single Polaroid. Haley asleep, in her new room, taken from outside the window. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding in my throat. My hands went cold. On the back, scribbled in red ink, "Don't forget who taught you to disappear." That's when I knew. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were daring me to chase them. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the Polaroid, my fingers numb against the thick white border. It wasn't just the image that haunted me, Haley's sleeping face, framed by pale curtains and the soft glow of a nightlight. It was the angle. The photo had been taken from outside her window. They'd been that close. Close enough to touch the glass. Close enough to grab her if they wanted. But they hadn't. Not yet. Not. Reggie called the police immediately. Diane held me like I was still 12 like the day I first arrived, and she wasn't letting go this time. But I couldn't stop shaking, not from fear, from fury. They were escalating. They'd crossed into a new game, one where winning didn't mean survival. It meant exposure, ruin, and they were betting I wouldn't go that far. They still didn't know me. The DOJ moved Haley again this time to a state-run safe house in Atlantis under a pseudonym. She couldn't use her phone. I couldn't reach her directly. But the last text she managed to send was short. "I'm not running anymore." That made two of us. I gave Ellen everything, every backup, every photo, every password and document we had compiled. I wanted the Moore case turned into a fire that wouldn't stop burning. We filed a public petition to freeze every account under the aliases David and Cynthia had used. Turns out they had created 5, each one under a variation of their names and mine. They weren't just hiding money, they were hiding behind me. Meanwhile, Miles took over the tech. He scrubbed IPs, tracked metadata, cross-referenced location pings from Cynthia's old blog uploads. And he found something, a photo she had posted over a year ago, a landscape shot of a marina with coordinates barely visible in the corner. Nothing special at first glance. But when we matched those coordinates to the photo she'd just texted me from the car, the skyline was the same. Puerto Peñasco, Mexico. Miles stared at the screen, blinking. They've circled back. Same region, same game. They're sloppy. I didn't hesitate. Let's go. Of course I couldn't cross international lines. Not legally, but I didn't need to go there myself. I just needed to be seen there. With help from Ellen and her DOJ contacts, we coordinated a sting, not the guns blazing kind you see in action movies, but a quiet, strategic exposure. They used a decoy, a kid roughly my size and build, wearing a hoodie I'd worn in my viral video, filmed entering the marina through drone footage we leaked to a few online channels known for tracking fugitives. It worked faster than any warrant. Cynthia took the bait first. She messaged me from a burner account. No threats this time, just a single line. "Come alone and we'll disappear for good. Bring Haley if you want her safe." They were panicking. That was our window. The Sting team intercepted the signal within 12 hours. We traced the IP, coordinated with Mexican law enforcement, and set up surveillance at a small rental villa overlooking the bay. Cynthia and David had been staying there under fake names, paying in crypto. And when the agents moved in, they weren't ready. Not this time. They found Cynthia trying to smash a burner phone in the bathroom. David was already packing. Haley's name was scribbled on a piece of paper next to a list of bus routes headed south. They were gone before dinner. But this part's important. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't want the satisfaction of watching them in handcuffs. I didn't want closure by violence. I wanted something deeper. I wanted to rebuild without them poisoning the edges of my story. So, instead I waited in the Carter's kitchen, a bowl of cereal in front of me, shaking hands, holding a spoon, while Diane played gospel music and tried not to cry. When the call came, I didn't cheer. I didn't collapse. I just exhaled. They were in custody, official, confirmed, extradition underway. But the story wasn't over. That night I opened the front door to grab the newspaper. A man was standing on the porch, late 30s, clean-shaven, wearing an oversized windbreaker, and holding a cardboard box. My heart slammed into my throat. "You, Eli?" he asked, voice low. I nodded slowly. "I used to work for your father," he said, "back when things were clean, before all the offshore crap, before Zurich." I stared at the box. "What's in that?" He handed it over. "Everything he didn't want you to find." Then he turned and walked into the dark without another word. Inside the box were files, hard drives, a flash drive labeled Umbrella V1, a passport with my name and David's photo, legal documents, old school records. One folder marked custody transfer, denied. I opened it. Inside was a letter, signed by David, dated 6 months before they gave me up. "We can't control him anymore. He's watching. He's remembering. It's safer to cut him loose than to have him turn." I sat there, the letter trembling in my hand. They didn't give me up because I was weak. They gave me up because I wasn't. And if what was in that box was what I suspected, what they were really hiding, then this story wasn't just about abandonment. It was about the secret I wasn't supposed to live long enough to uncover. Story 2. My spouse took home a $9 million prize, booted me out, and filed for divorce. However, she was unaware of the prenuptial agreement her parents made me sign before to our marriage. Of the 35 of us, I have a modest upbringing. I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom home that always smelled of freshly laundered clothes and home-cooked meals, and my parents reside in a peaceful suburb. I worked at a number of odd jobs after high school, including bartending, assisting at my uncle's hardware business, and finally running a neighborhood sports goods store. It was honest, but it wasn't glitzy. In contrast, my wife was from a different world than mine. Her parents drove expensive automobiles, had several residences, and occasionally threw lavish parties. Let's name them Maya, my mother-in-law, and Phil, my father-in-law. Maya. Phil had a subtle authority in any space and was a towering, imposing figure, both physically and socially. His casual comments were more like subliminal threats or deceptive statements. Maya Mill was as adept at subtly expressing disdain. People might shrink at the sight of a single raised eyebrow alone. Although they were never explicitly nasty to me, I could sense their disdain behind their kind remarks. I became aware of my wife's parents' intense concern of strangers stealing their family's possessions after we were engaged. Even though my wife and I had been dating for years before we could decide on a wedding date, they treated me like an outsider. Phil insisted that I sign a prenuptial agreement, Maya. I was too overcome by love and lacked the resources to challenge it legally. I insisted that it was only a little gesture to please her parents. I thought that the only assurance I needed was love. I can still clearly remember the day I signed. At her parents' enormous house, it was a warm afternoon. It was almost like a typical business transaction when Maya File lay out the document, pushed a pen in my direction, and offered me coffee. My wife said little as she stood to the side. Even though it ached, I dismissed it since I thought it wouldn't matter in the long run. In essence, the agreement said that any inheritances, gifts, or trust monies that belonged to her family would continue to be her own property. However, any significant item that we obtained together, like as a home or lottery wins, would be considered marital property. That seemed strange to me, but all I wanted was to wed her. We were married in a beautiful ceremony by a lake 6 months later. The opulence overwhelmed my parents, yet they were encouraging. When my father welcomed my in-laws, I remember the strain on his face. I believed that love would dispel all uncertainties, but he had always advised me to follow my instincts. There were no significant incidents throughout the first several years. Our residence is a condominium. Our security was aided by her parents. Although her father's gift had provided the down payment, I made monthly mortgage payments. In retrospect, it was never really a gift, more like a means of dominating us. However, at the time, I thought this was the norm for rich households. Money disputes and occasional outbursts over her parents interfering with our decisions were commonplace in our marriage. They would unexpectedly arrive, bring new furnishings or decor, and sometimes abruptly rearrange our entire living area. My wife would dismiss my annoyance as the helpfulness of her parents. Then the day arrived that completely upended everything. Excited, my wife contacted me to tell me that she had won a $9 million lottery prize from a random ticket she had purchased at a service station. I was thrilled at first, wishing to explore the world and abandon our jobs. But the happiness soon faded. Even from my parents, she demanded that we keep it a secret. She started talking about properly claiming the money and meeting with lawyers I had never met, which made her strangely paranoid. It hurt when she told me that I would feel uncomfortable attending these meetings. I was unaware that the true bombshell was still to come. She and her aunt were searching through drawers when I arrived home from work one day, fatigued. She broke the news in a casual manner. She was going to file for divorce. She instructed me to leave the condo and pack my things. She said it was an agreement in her name. I was blown away. Yes, I paid monthly mortgage payments, but it seems she felt her newfound wealth and her father's original down payment rendered me inconsequential. I sensed the beauty of my heart. With a trembling voice, I phoned my father and informed him that I was recently evicted from my own house. It was the height of treachery. Then came the biggest shock. I found out that my father-in-law had dispatched his own lawyer to protect her. In order to separate the lottery money from me, they wanted me out. However, they have forgotten the conditions of the very prenuptial agreement they imposed on me. It is stated that any windfall received during marriage was considered a shared asset, rather than completely protecting their daughter. I suddenly understood that they might not be able to keep it all if they insisted on divorce me immediately following that windfall. I made the decision to proceed cautiously. My father advised me to maintain my composure, get a lawyer who is not in their social circle, and prepare for a heated argument, and I wasn't going to fold. They are treating me like a disposable annoyance and have flung me down the gauntlet. They had seriously overestimated me if they believed I would go peacefully. I tried to process the shock by staying at my parents' house for a few nights. My mother was furious, accusing my in-laws of being rude from the beginning. Even though he was just as furious, my father remained realistic. First thing in the morning, he made an appointment for me with a family law lawyer, an old friend. I felt a wave of relief and rage as I sat in that lawyer's office. I informed them about my wife's recent $9 million win and how the in-laws pushed for a prenuptial agreement before surprising me with a divorce. He genuinely laughed when he read the prenuptial agreement. He said that they had shot themselves in the foot. Specifically, they contain wording that, absent a judge's irrational legal interpretation, bundles lottery wins under marital assets. You have a right to a sizable share. It felt like a lifeline to hear this. I've been afraid that the prenup would prevent me from moving on. However, it turned out that the prospect of a lottery situation had been overwhelmed by their dread of me asserting inherited money. My attorney cautioned that it would not be simple. My in-laws had a lot of money, were highly connected, and probably had a whole legal team on hand. However, he thought we had a good case, particularly given I had been abruptly kicked out of our jointly inhabited house and had made financial contributions to the marriage. I inquired about our state's divorce procedure. Months or more might easily pass during a contentious divorce. However, my wife's side may look for a quick settlement if they understood they were in a precarious situation. The attorney foresaw that they would attempt coercion or deceitful means to get me to give away my rights at a low cost. Within days, I received a threatening voicemail from my father-in-law urging me to stop because I deserved nothing from his daughter. He said he would make sure I had nothing if I attempted to collect the lottery money. I was recently told to document everything by my lawyer. Then outside my parents' house, my mother-in-law cornered me and offered me a small sum if I would disappear without a trace. Although it was so cheap that it wouldn't even cover half of my mortgage contributions, she pitched it as a fantastic bargain. I declined, stating that we would meet in court. She laughed, perplexed by my refusal, obviously not used to having her money refused. My lawyer filed papers to prevent the lottery monies from being moved or concealed when discussions came to a deadlock. My in-laws were furious about it and began making up stories about me being a gold digger who took advantage of their naive daughter. It's stupid, but I didn't back down. My father-in-law tried to interfere with my job, but my employer who ran the sports goods store had my back. Friends took sides. Some praised me for retaliating, while others called me petty. Despite the oppressive atmosphere, I resisted giving in. We were given a court date following a few weeks of unsuccessful negotiations. I personally couldn't find my wife. She ignored any direct engagement with me, essentially being shielded by her parents. Claiming that I was the leech who had done nothing to help the marriage, she let her attorneys speak for her. Financial documents, bill time-sharing, and the specific prenuptial agreement regarding windfalls were the things my lawyer pushed back on. We also brought up the fact that I had been forcibly removed from the property. The court gave both parties instructions to get ready for a more official asset division hearing. My supervisor urged my father-in-law to get lost after he threatened him once again in a final attempt at intimidation. That simply made my father-in-law more irate. Although he was certain that a court would see through their intimidation tactics, my lawyer advised us to move cautiously. There was nothing that could have prepared me for the last court battle, but at least I knew that, oddly, the law was on my side, because of the very prenuptial agreement they imposed on me. As the weeks went by, the anxiety about the impending hearing intensified. My wife continued to stay away from me directly. However, her attorneys barraged me with motions. Because she bought the ticket, they maintained that the lottery prize was independent property, disregarding the prenuptial agreement that said any significant inheritance received during a marriage was marital. My father-in-law, meantime, attempted to damage my reputation with friends and business associates by spreading the myth that I was a gold digger who had married into the family just to get money. I experienced a whirlwind of motivation and anger at this time. They were wrong if they thought they could intimidate me into giving up my rights. I had records of my contributions to our joint life, including energy bills, food, and partly mortgage payments. I went over every element of the prenuptial agreement with my lawyer. He drew attention to a crucial passage that lists all financial windfalls, including but not restricted to winners from lotteries and game shows. Unless otherwise specified, marital assets will be taken into consideration. My in-laws appeared to have forgotten to close the rear door. We held an initial status meeting 1 week prior to the hearing. My wife came with her parents, a financial advisor, and a posse of lawyers for attorneys. They gave me the same arrogant look. But when my lawyer coolly pulled out the prenuptial agreement and pointed out the precise part about lottery winnings, their faces faltered. After listening in silence and appearing unimpressed by their attempts to have it dismissed, the judge ordered that all significant assets be kept frozen until the main hearing. My mother-in-law confronted me outside the courthouse that same afternoon and insisted that we have adult conversations. She attempted to provide a flat payment that was much less than what she had previously offered, calling it generous for someone from my background. I declined once more, informing her that the court would make the final decision. As if I were the one who unexpectedly divorced her daughter, she yelled that I was ruining the family. Even though the hypocrisy infuriated me, I maintained my composure. I had been cautioned by my attorney not to get into heated arguments that might be used against me in the future. I was concerned that my in-laws might attempt to hide the lottery winnings in hidden accounts behind the scenes. Anticipating that scenario, my attorney asked the court to issue injunction, prohibiting any significant transactions. Additionally, we made plans to have a forensic accountant on hand in case we thought they were embezzling money. My father-in-law became enraged. In his voicemail, he called me disgusting and said that I had drained his daughter's life of love. Given that they were the ones who tossed me out as soon as I won the lottery, it was wealthy. I worked with my lawyer to carefully prepare as the hearing drew near. To make sure I would come across as composed and truthful in court, we practiced my statement. I had receipts for the mortgage I had helped pay for, copies of the prenuptial agreement, and even a text message from my wife, acknowledging our joint expenses. The attorney advised me to be succinct in my responses. Let the facts do the talking. We would respond with unambiguous documentation if it attempted emotional theater. My heart was racing as I stood in front of the courthouse on the morning of the hearing. I went with my parents for moral support. I saw my wife sitting next to her father, both of them with icy expressions, but they waited outside the courtroom once the proceedings started. With her arms folded, her mother hovered at the rear. With their immaculate suits, my father-in-law's attorneys exuded confidence, possibly thinking that resources and legal prowess could overcome the evidence. A severe woman in her 50s, the judge wasted no time. She asked both sides to make their case. The lead lawyer for my wife attempted to paint me as a small contributor who did little more than share a residence. They contended that she used her own funds to make the lottery purchase. However, my attorney calmly brought up how the prenuptial agreement specifically included these windfalls as marital property. Additionally, our bank records demonstrated that she had used our joint account card on that particular day. There was a noticeable tremor in my father-in-law's camp when we presented that proof. The court inquired as to whether they had any supporting records that demonstrated the money was her own. They stuttered, saying it was her father's contribution into the account or that the card had been used by mistake. However, the remarks unmistakably identified our names in addition to hers. The judge listened, her eyes moving hopefully to them. My wife finally said anything. She says her parents pushed for a divorce and that she never intended to upset me. She stuttered over her words when the prize arrived to safeguard family assets. She acknowledged feeling under pressure, but she also attempted to defend it by saying that everyone would hunt us down if they found out about the money. My attorney inquired as to whether she sought my advice prior to making these choices. No, she said. One could feel the judge's disdain. By lunchtime, it became evident that the prenuptial agreement had both advantages and disadvantages for them. The same instrument that had been used to segregate their money now threatened to give me a sizable portion of their lottery winnings. The court ordered a second hearing for final determinations, noting she was inclined to see the lottery as a substantial marital asset subject to equitable distribution outside. My father-in-law muttered as he passed me, "This is not at all finished." But there was no denying that his confidence was broken. In the weeks preceding the ultimate decision, they became more desperate. The attorneys for my father-in-law made every effort, submitting petitions to rewrite the prenuptial agreement, arguing that the intention was not to incorporate lottery winnings. Making reference to the clear wording, the judge rejected these requests. My mother-in-law attempted to corner me once again, telling me that I would regret breaking their family. I bluntly informed her that they had initiated everything by evicting me and deceiving me with a divorce. My wife attempted to contact me, leaving a heartfelt message stating that she didn't want our relationship to end so badly and that we could still save it if we could only make a private agreement. If they had been fair to me from the beginning, I would have given it some thought. However, my faith was lost following the threats, falsehoods, and forced eviction. I was told not to participate in these back-channel discussions by my attorney. Our legal position was solid. There's no need to accept crumbs. The courtroom was crowded with lawyers from both sides on the day of the last hearing. My mom, dad, and a couple of friends came to help me. After reviewing the amended files and allowing final remarks, the judge entered the bench and sat silently in the back. The main attorney for my father-in-law made one more attempt to characterize me as a crafty opportunist who only found out about the prenuptial agreement after taking advantage of the family's generosity. My attorney responded with a fact-based argument. They also had me sign a prenuptial agreement. It specifically mentioned 3 a shared property and a lottery or other windfall. I made monthly contributions to a condo that my father-in-law partially funded. Therefore, it was also not a completely distinct asset. Furthermore, their quick divorce application immediately following the prize was classic proof of their scheme to keep me from the money. After carefully listening, the judge rendered her decision. She stated that the lotto winnings were unmistakably marital property, nonetheless the prenuptial agreement. She chastised my in-laws for attempting to distort the contract that they had written themselves. She also determined that I should be compensated for my share of the mortgage and other marital payments, and that my wife's decision to kick me out of the apartment right away was irrational. I won, to put it briefly. The judge issued a directive. I get paid for my portion of the property as well as a sizable portion of any lottery winnings. In order to handle papers, we parted ways with the finalization date set for a few weeks later. There was thunder in my father-in-law's face. My mother-in-law whispered angrily to him, looking indignant. With tears in her eyes, my wife stood there. Even out of sincere remorse or even rage about losing a lot of money, I had a wave of melancholy and validation. We were once in love, but everything was destroyed by their attempts to take advantage of me, parental influence and avarice. Their attorneys attempted to offer a slightly altered settlement in the aftermath, perhaps in the hopes that I would agree to a lower amount in order to prevent more controversy. We had no reason to lower the judge's decision, so my attorney suggested that we accept it as is. I merely gave up full stake in the condo as a compromise. I had no desire to return to that location. They sent me a check for a very large amount. Did it receive half the prize? Not quite, but it was large enough to allow me to comfortably reconstruct my life at that time. I came to see my in-laws' conceit that affluence shielded them from repercussions. They weren't prepared for my powerful retaliation. Ironically, the very document that guaranteed my portion of the profits was the prenuptial agreement they insisted on. To the best of my knowledge, my wife, if she ever existed, is still being raised by her parents. Because of the ensuing disaster, she has lost face in her social group. She is dealing with guilt, according to some common acquaintances, but I doubt she would ever publicly acknowledge her family's involvement in this. As a thank you for supporting me, I upgraded my parents' house using a portion of the settlement. I also invested a chunk. Even so, I was scarred by the entire experience. My perspective on marriage, trust, and money has changed, and I find solace in the fact that I held my ground. I resisted being coerced into taking food leftovers. It was painful, but it was an excuse. The end result seemed like a victory over oppression, no longer under the influence of my in-laws. I'm going forward. Ironically, I've gone back to living a simpler life much as I did before getting married. But if they remember anything about me, they will see that I'm stronger, smarter, and not the gullible fool they thought they could steamroll. Let's say they unintentionally provided me with the legal tool to save me from going bankrupt. The conflict was initiated by them. I completed it, and this concludes the chapter. Story 3. They recognized me as soon as I entered through the doors. My stepmother tensed her grin. My dad's mouth tightened. Brandon as well. He grinned as if I had just walked in from a life gone bad. Take a look at what the wind brought back, Linda mumbled so loudly that the employees could hear her. It had been 7 years since my last visit home. Not since my father informed me that I was no longer a member of this family, for rejecting his business plan and instead entering federal service. And now here I was standing in the black-clad marble entryway of the Carter estate, with only a little clutch containing a letter of federal assignment and my NSA credentials. But they didn't inquire as to why I had come back. They didn't inquire about my well-being. A tray of champagne flutes was presented to me. Linda said bluntly, "Since you're here, be of service." And since they were unaware of what was about to happen, I grinned. The tray appeared lighter than it actually was. The eyes are the reason, not the champagne flutes. They watched in dozens, assessing and evaluating, some openly boastful, some curious, some amused. Since I was 23, I had not set foot on the Carter estate. Back then, I was the Golden Child valedictorian debate team captain, early admission to Wharton. Back then, they called me brilliant. That was the day I informed my father that I was accepting a classified job in federal cyber intelligence instead of following his meticulously planned MBA program. There was an immediate silence. The shame is unforgiving. I was packing my bags by dusk. The next morning, the locks were changed. So, yes, holding a tray, tonight was poetic. "Keep your shoulders back," Linda whispered as she brushed past me. "At least try to look like you haven't completely wasted your potential." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I had nothing to prove to her anymore. The guests filtered in slowly, men in crisp suits with navy and maroon ties. Women in sequined gowns that cost more than my first clearance badge. They all mingled under the chandelier, sipping wine, and marveling at the scale model of Carter Tech's upcoming joint defense project displayed in the center of the grand hall. Brandon stood near it, charming as ever. 30. Handsome in the least interesting way. Born with every door wide open. He had followed the script perfectly. Business school, Carter Tech internship. Fast-tracked promotions under Dad's watchful eye. Tonight he was being introduced to investors as the future of the company, as if that future wasn't contingent on a key track that I could kill. "Please pardon me, miss." As if I were a vending machine, a man in a tux waved his empty glass at me. I accepted it silently, put it back and grinned. I wasn't recognized by him. Most didn't. However, those who did. The friend's family and former co-workers, the crowd at the country club. They did not greet or give hugs. They offered rumors and whispers. "She's going to join the government or something. She reportedly dropped out of graduate school. She went off the grid, I believe." You know, conspiracy types. 3 aunts were already debating my attire when I walked by the dining room. One whispered, "At least she's dressed modestly." She was always the somber one. "As if that were a sin," said another. "Charles, poor guy. A great deal of potential was squandered. Since I wasn't there for them, I let it all go. For the audit, I was present. One of the biggest ongoing cyber defense contracts awaiting final authorization was the Carter Tech Blackstone Global Partnership. My agency and eventually me would grant that permission. Under a code name, I have been examining their architecture for the past 3 months. I was on a rare last-minute site visit tonight to check for operational integrity. Usually I would have come to this with a briefing, a badge, and a locked office. Not this time, though. This time I wanted to observe their behavior when they believed I was insignificant. The room was entered by a tall man in his 50s, a war general's posture, piercing eyes and gray suit. Something changed in the energy. Conversation stopped in the middle of sentences. He was this. Blackstone Global's CEO is Richard Baines. With the rehearsed zeal of a man trying to win Richard over, my father hurried over to him. Charles smiled. "It is a privilege to have you here. Our lead strategist on the Aegis interface is my son Brandon Carter." Baines shook Brandon's hand and nodded courteously. The name is familiar to me, eagerly awaiting the presentation. Then he looked at me from the other side of the room. His brows raised and his eyes narrowed. Then a silent grin of incredulity appeared on his face. That look was familiar to me. He knew who I was. He ignored my father completely and started to move through the crowd, disregarding the orders. "Agent Carter," he said in a quiet but distinct voice. "I had no idea you would be physically present." Beside me, my stepmother tensed up. My dad blinked as if the script had been rewritten. He had been honing his craft for years. Slowly he said, "Richard, did you just say that?" To accept the tray, Agent Baines held out his hand to Minnow, but to shake mine. "Your briefings have been read by me. Excellent work on the protocol for the Geneva breach. We made some adjustments to our own firewalls based on your counter honeypot model." Calmly I grinned. "Appreciate that, sir. I thought I'd make an in-person appearance before tomorrow's audit. Consider it a surprise inspection." He gave a hearty laugh. A damn effective one. By now the room had gone almost silent. Mouths parted slightly, eyes widened. A fork was dropped. My father's face had turned from pride to confusion to dawning horror. Linda clutched her champagne glass like it might save her from drowning. "Jade," he said slowly, voice cracking, You're the federal agent they sent." "Yes," I said. "Technically, I'm the one deciding whether Carter Tech moves forward with the contract, but tonight I'm just here to enjoy the party." I handed the tray to a nearby staffer and stepped forward, letting the spotlight fall where it always should have been. Not behind the tray, not beneath the shame, but exactly where I stood. Eye level, unflinching, undeniable, game on. They didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. Not my father, not Linda, not Brandon. After I was called Agent Carter by Richard Baines. In the midst of the celebration, it seemed as though someone had set off a silenced grenade. Individuals muttered, they gazed. A few appeared impressed. Others appeared genuinely uneasy, as if they were suddenly terrified of saying something inappropriate in front of me. It didn't bother me. I had discovered that fear was frequently a more beneficial response than approval. I moved away from the guests and stood close to the fireplace, allowing the quartet's soft hum of strings to block out the storm that was brewing behind my eyes. That moment with Linda's champagne glass quivering slightly in her hand, and my father's face frozen in bewilderment. It didn't feel like victory, even though it should have, because there was something raw, a scar that hadn't healed hidden behind the quiet satisfaction. A still resonant voice. You are no longer my daughter if you leave this jade. I was 23. I received my Penn degree early. I was at the top of my applied mathematics class. I was accepted to 2 Ivy League MBA programs, had 3 internship offers from Fortune 500 companies, and had a seat at Carter Tech reserved next to Brandon. Like a corporate resume, it was all laid out for the version of me that my father had created, best not for me. The NSA letter then arrived. I had been quietly approached by a recruiter following a cybersecurity showcase at my university. They had witnessed my algorithmic work and my capstone project on behavioral AI-based breach detection. I was given the opportunity to join a rotational operations team after passing 3 background checks for interviews. Yes, I replied. At first, my father remained silent. Nothing but silence, a scotch, and then one sentence. You're committing a costly error. I made an effort to clarify. I tried to let him know that I preferred to follow my own path. For me, that public service had significance, that I wasn't evading accountability. I was sprinting for impact. He was indifferent. He spat, "You want to be a spy in a basement. Do you consider this to be honorable? It's pitiful. It is intended for those who are unable to cope with reality." Like she always did, Linda added more. She is only acting in this way to get attention. Perhaps she wouldn't need to ruin her life if we hadn't given Brandon so much praise. They quarreled for hours. The ultimatum followed. Do you wish to be employed by shadow people? Then be one. Jade. Leave this house and don't return. That evening I packed my belongings. Nobody bid farewell, not even Brandon. The following morning he shrugged as he walked past me in the hallway. I suppose not. Everyone has a chance to succeed. For 2 years, I resided in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundry room, worked nights, passed countless security checks. Supervisors who didn't care where I attended school yelled at me, and I didn't turn around, right up until tonight. I was interrupted by a quiet voice. Agent Carter. It was one of Blackstone's junior engineers, mid-30s, nervous, wearing an unmatching tie. I simply wanted to mention your adaptive intrusion monitoring paper. It altered our approach to threat trees. I smiled after blinking. I'm happy. Regards. He hurried off, as if he needed to summon the courage to speak to me. I was more than grateful for the gesture. At that moment, Brandon showed up. Before I noticed the disdain, I could smell the cologne. He walked up with a half smile, the kind people wear when they don't know whether to laugh or panic. So he said, "You're the one holding our future in her hands." I didn't respond. I just raised an eyebrow. Funny, he added. For someone who wanted to leave this family so badly, being the one who could bring it down makes you seem incredibly at ease. Accountability and destruction are 2 different things. Calmly I said, "Oh, please," he sneered. "It's a personal matter. You've always needed to prove yourself." "No," I replied. "Simply put, I've never wanted to prove it to the wrong people." He twitched his face. I put a lot of effort into this company," he said. "I didn't just get it from Dad. The 5-figure allowance was something I didn't bother to remind him of. The hand-delivered board seats and the customized internship. I didn't have to. I hope you put in a lot of work." "Simply put," I said, "because I'm going to audit every line of code you approved starting tomorrow." He gave me the impression that I had slapped him. "This contract," I added, "focuses on Homeland Systems defense encryption and national infrastructure. Brandon, it's not a family project. It isn't a play area. The deal is off if I discover even one deliberate weakness, and you'll be lucky to have your name on the door." He stepped backward. "I understand. So, is this retaliation?" "No," I said quietly. "This is accountability, something you haven't had to carry before." I didn't turn around as I passed him. There was no more music. Somewhere behind me, the guests were departing. In an attempt to explain how his daughter, his failure was, my father was still caught up in the same conversation. The future of his business is now in the hands of this woman. I would enter Carter Tech tomorrow as the truth teller they never anticipated, not as the abandoned daughter or a betrayer of the family name. And this time I wouldn't be carrying a tray. The next morning, I got to Carter Tech at 7:48. No military convoy, no grand entrance. Only my NSA laptop bag, a federal car with blackout windows, and a silent ID scan at the front gate. After recognizing my clearance, the guard straightened up. "Agent Carter, good morning." "Only Jade," I answered. "Let's keep things easy." The structure featured sleek glass walls, simple steel, and a well-balanced mix of wealth and conceit. I hadn't been here since I was a teenager when my father used to take me in to see true leadership in action. I still thought I would inherit all of this back then. One day. When I walked in, the receptionist stared. Clearly word had gotten out. "To start the periodic review, I'm here. Show me to the access floor of the system, and I'll handle it from there," I said. "Would you like a briefing from a member of the executive team?" She stumbled. I grinned. "They will eventually catch up." I reached floor 12 as the elevator chimed softly. Systems, safety, infrastructure. This was Carter Tech's central hub where code was implemented, data resided, and vulnerabilities could result in fatalities. I also discovered there how terrible things had gotten under Brandon's direction. I was greeted at the server room by Milo, a young engineer. When he saw my badge, he blinked. "Are you her?" "I'm me," I answered. "You are, Milo. For this contract, you have been in charge of endpoint containment." "Indeed." "Excellent. Take me through your structure, starting with the base layer and ending with the red zone shielding. I'm interested in learning how defense segmentation was applied and where it falls short." He raised his eyebrows. "Fails. It is impossible to have perfect code." "Flatly," I said. "The only code that hasn't been thoroughly tested is this one." Milo took a swallow. "Correct." He began guiding me around the mainframe control center as soon as we stepped inside. Internal routing protocols, firewall clusters, and central nodes. Although he was competent, his explanations lacked confidence. He hesitated when I asked him about redirect sequences a few times. "This wasn't something you created from scratch, was it?" I inquired. "No," he acknowledged. "The majority of it had executive-level pre-approval. In order to adhere to the partnership timeline, Brandon wanted it deployed quickly." I blinked. Without conducting a final round of security testing, he expedited the encryption layers. Milo winced. That was not what I was supposed to say. I inhaled deeply. And there it was. Cutting corners. The type of one that appears effective to investors but poses a threat to national security. "How many individuals on this floor are fully aware of the real-time signature behaviors of the red zones?" I inquired. Milo scowled. "Priya transferred last week, but it's just the two of us." I wrote down the names. I would like access to the sandbox logs and all code commit logs for the previous 4 weeks. "Indeed, Agent." "One more thing, too. Brandon Carter's admin access credentials are currently locked by Milo. If necessary, I'll clear it later." He blinked once more. "Do you want the CEO blocked?" I looked him in the face. "I want you to adhere to the Federal Security Compliance Protocol, which states that during periods of active government audits, you cannot have exact-level override access." His gaze expanded. "Indeed, ma'am. I had already identified 3 significant vulnerabilities by 1012. Direct connections to the core via unprotected API routes without event throttling. Outdated packet inspection filters make it possible to get around quiet breach signatures. The sandbox logs contain an odd timestamp deletion mechanism called Layer 2 detection. Most likely unintentional, but potentially worse. At the Pentagon level, each one was sufficient to raise concerns. These 3 factors taken together could result in a contract suspension. I sat down at a terminal, opened a private report folder named CTAG's Liaison Review Level, and logged into the audit interface. Omega. My actual work would start there. The security floor door hissed open an hour later. I knew who it was without turning. Brandon. He spoke with the same artificial composure as the night before. He seemed to be trying to sound composed, but he couldn't get rid of the feeling that he had already lost it. "You've adjusted to your surroundings then." I continued typing. "It was simple because of you. I couldn't access my own system because of you. I adhered to the federal auditing protocol. If you had read the compliance terms you signed, you would have been aware of that." He approached. "You really don't want to ruin this deal. Because of a few bugs, do you?" I spun Brandon around. "It has nothing to do with bugs. Under your supervision, an infrastructure was launched too soon without red team penetration, and full client access overlays are still operational in test mode. You hoped a defense client wouldn't pull the trigger after you handed them a loaded weapon. His face went white. It's dramatic. No, I replied. It's forensic. He attempted to reorganize. I made aggressive calls, you see. That is the nature of innovation. You stated it yourself. Every system has flaws. Audit it then. Make it right. Don't bury us, though. I briefly saw it as I gazed at him. Underneath the charm is the panic. The worry that perhaps he wasn't prepared for this. Perhaps Daddy's scheme had gone too far. A Barry Carter tech is not what I want. But I won't let it bury a national defense system either, I said quietly. Brandon, this isn't your internship. This is true. I wasn't here to save face unlike them, so I went back to work after he turned and left, without saying anything. Something much more significant was what I was here to save. In preparation for Brandon's big pitch, the conference room at Carter Tech was furnished with a full-length wall screen, glass steel, and an ego-long mahogany table with 12 leather chairs on either side. Everything was polished, and bottles of water were arranged like miniature soldiers. Everything was ready. Except for the code, everything was flawless. At the far end of the table was where I sat. Seat of government, neutral badge, blazer in black, not a logo. I was not offered coffee. Nobody inquired about my needs. They were all aware of who I was now, but they were unsure of my next move. That the uncertainty served as leverage pleased me. Brandon arrived 15 minutes late, accompanied by 2 assistants who appeared to prefer being somewhere else. He smiled tightly at me and then looked around the room as if he owned it. Though it was now nervous, the confidence remained. Make a hollow around the edges. My dad entered after him. Perfect expression, impeccable posture, and a Charles Carter suit. Unreadable. He hadn't spoken to me since the previous evening. He didn't have to. It was all in the tension. You returned to make us look foolish. No, I returned to defend something more important than you. However, if humiliation was an unintended consequence, then so be it. The last guests took over. Blackstone Global's CEO is Richard Baines. As soon as he walked in, the room moved. Everyone stood up. My dad got up. Richard. Greetings. With practiced charm, he greeted. Baines turned to face me after nodding. Clearly, he said, Agent Carter. It's nice to see you again. I hope your team is happy with the preliminary results. I gave a nod. Our review has already started. After Brandon's demonstration, I'll give a quick security brief. My dad blinked, his bewilderment barely concealed. You are. In this meeting, you're speaking. Baines's eyebrows went up. Charles, she is the main liaison. She has complete auditing authority. I take it you were informed of that. I simply didn't know she would be. The room listened to everything he said. He remained silent. Didn't know she would be famous. The meeting got underway. With the vigor of a man feigning not to be cornered, Brandon bounded into his pitch. The screen was filled with flashing slides, forecast charts, and an interface, mock-ups. He discussed defense potential market impact and innovation. I paid close attention, even made notes. However, I also observed. How was it watched? His voice shook just a little. My father looked at me from the other side of the table, every time I lifted my pen as if I were pulling the pin off a grenade. After waiting for Brandon to finish his last slide, he informed me that Carter Tech was prepared to fully implement the first phase of the Aegis interface, in combination with Blackstone's current encryption architecture. There was polite applause, the goodwill shown before the main event starts. Baines then faced me. What do you think, Agent Carter? I stood with my laptop plugged in. The screen changed from Brandon's slick images to a government seal on a stark black background. Just facts, no animation or music. My team and I started a Level Omega protocol review of Carter Tech's back-end infrastructure 48 hours ago. We looked at endpoint security, firewall integrity, sandbox behavior, and simulations of protocol continuity under duress. We discovered 3 category red vulnerabilities during that lull. Under federal contract law, any one of them would have rendered this partnership ineligible. When taken as a whole, all 3 point to a breakdown in executive oversight and deployment scheduling. There was an immediate silence. The projector also appeared to become quieter. On the table, my father's knuckles turned white. Brandon tightened his jaw. I selected the throttled access remote slide. 14.3 seconds is the pipeline breach time. 61% of slides have an outdated inspection layer failure rate. Sandbox log YP inconsistency on slide 3. 0 forensic traceability. I stated calmly that these weaknesses might make it possible for a mid-level adversary to use your system to compromise national defense procedures. Not even a nation-state actor would be required. Live defense data feeds could be compromised by a persistent college hacker. Baines had a somber expression. One of his vice presidents muttered obscenities. Brandon made an attempt to talk. These are transient bugs. For 3 complete production cycles, they have been in existence. You started the prototype after I interrupted. In any case, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to yell. Nothing could overpower the data. My dad cleared his throat. Miss Carter, Agent Carter, of course. I made the correction. Is all right. He stopped. Once more I clicked. The following slide. Logs of access. Brandon Carter is in charge of safety procedures. Time stamped. The room fell silent, and Brandon's face lost its hue. Safety was not disabled by 2. Without obtaining penetration clearance, I accelerated integration. According to what I said, you approved the use of an unreliable interface in a military-related system. Innovation isn't that. That is carelessness. I looked over at Baines. In light of the results, we advise a conditional integration freeze until Carter Tech reorganizes oversight and finishes third-party validation. Brandon got to his feet. My career is being ruined by you. I turned to face him. You're fortunate to have one left. At last, Baines said something. I'm in favor of the freeze. Richard was shot up by my father. We can certainly discuss this. He held up a hand. Charles, this cannot be negotiated. She is correct. For years, I have been reading her work. Hell, I've put her countermeasures into place in my own system. The system isn't ready if Jade claims it isn't. He gave me a look. Your suggestion is sound. Your final report will be awaited by Agent Carter. I gave a nod. They adjourned the meeting. Executives dispersed, chairs scraped. My father, Brandon, and I were the only individuals still in the room. Charles gave me a look as though he had never seen me before, not as a letdown. It was something he never anticipated, not a hopeless situation. You have this much power. I didn't grin. Dad, I didn't return to be strong. I returned to safeguard the important things, even if it means keeping it hidden from you. After that, I left. The study was right where I remembered it to be. Left hallway, 2nd floor. The door with the handle of the brass lion. I used to think that handle kept secrets when I was younger. I was aware now that it almost protected silence, the kind that pretends to be peace and festers for years. I didn't knock. From the leather armchair, my father raised his head. He was sitting across from Linda. Despite the fact that it was barely noon, she had her legs crossed and her wine glass tilted dangerously. I wanted Brandon to be absent, and he was not. Shut the door, my dad said. For a while I did. We all remained silent, only the grandfather clock ticking, similar to a countdown. The silence was finally broken by him. Jade, you made me feel ashamed. No, I said. You made a fool of yourself. I simply switched on the lights. Linda swirled her wine and scoffed. Do you believe this to be justice? Making fun of your own brother? After all we've given you, I chuckled softly. Not amusement, but the kind that comes from old scars. I didn't get love from you, I got conditions. There is a distinction. My dad got up. His voice sharpened, but did not rise. It was you who turned to leave. No, I claimed that you had pushed me out, since I wouldn't adhere to your plan. Because I didn't want to be Brandon's understudy or a puppet at Carter Tech. You believe that means you can return and play the role of judge and executioner. I put both of my palms flat on the mahogany desk. After taking my time getting there, I said I didn't come to punish. However, I didn't come to apologize for turning out to be someone you weren't expecting. Now Linda was standing too. You were always over the top. You had to constantly demonstrate your uniqueness. You simply couldn't be typical. Typical, I repeated. Do you mean submissive? She took a step forward. You believe that because a CEO commended your small intelligence project, you are now superior to us. I gave her a full turn. You're referring to my national encryption directive, which safeguarded American infrastructure in the wake of the Atlantic hack. That undertaking. She blinked. Her mouth parted, then shut again. Slowly, my father took a seat again. His voice was almost silent as he said, I never hated your intelligence. I simply detested the way you drifted away with it. That made me pause for a moment. I then gave a softer response. I didn't float. You exerted force. You always shut it down when I asked to pursue something outside of the family brand. I was more than a Carter Tech cog each time I appeared. I was obviously inconvenient as you stated. He did not refute it. I added that I never wanted to leave this family. However, I wasn't going to get smaller just to fit into your photo again. He lowered his gaze to his hands. Brandon wasn't prepared. The world now knows. Then perhaps the world should know. Linda snorted once more, but this time she remained silent. Her words were more fragile than her silence. I walked to the door and stopped. Something else is involved. My dad raised his head once more. I suggest you take Brandon's place as the project manager. Not with me. I'm leaving. But with a deserving individual. He scowled. Do you want your brother demoted? I want your legacy to be preserved. It's hanging by a thread at the moment. When he spoke next, his voice was worn out. How about you? What are you looking for? I took one final glance back. Not who he planned me to be, but who I was what I wanted in a father. Then I turned to leave. I went outside as the sun was disappearing behind the Carter Tech building. Except for a few black sedans and lingering executives, the lot was almost deserted. It was chilly outside, tidy. It made me realize that I had spent too much time in that family breathing stale air. I heard footsteps behind me as I arrived at my car. Brandon, not wearing a jacket. He was wearing only a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows as if he were trying to appear composed, but his eyes were telling. Already rushing back to Washington, D.C., he inquired, crossed arms. Not that I'm running. Unlocking the door, I said, I'm done here, though. He didn't look at me as he leaned against the car next to me. That's it then. Like a savior, you blow it all up and leave. No, I replied. I leave as though I've done my job. When he did, he took a moment to respond. He spoke softer. Do you honestly believe I never tried? I was surprised by that. Made an effort to be what he desired. Do you believe he gave me this position with a silver spoon? He chuckled bitterly. No. He gave me an unchangeable blueprint. You were compared to me for every error I made. I scowled even after you were gone. It didn't look like that. Obviously not. The world was being saved by you. I tried not to break it while I was in here. I folded my arms and leaned against my own car. Then why didn't you speak up? Because he would think I was weak if I said I wasn't ready. And he would cut me off if I acknowledged that you were superior. Instead, you allowed the business to almost get suspended by the federal government. He flinched. Until you showed up, I didn't realize how bad it got, he said. I believed I had everything under control. Perhaps I reasoned if I succeeded, he would at last stop mentioning you like some forgotten legend. It hurt more than I thought it would. Brandon, you were never meant to compete with me. Softer now, I said. It was not intended for us to be placed against one another. For the first time in many years, he gave me a full look. Perhaps you also adore this location, don't you? Before they forced me to choose between it and myself, I said I did. Once more silence. Are you going to report me for the override? He then asked. I gave a headshake. It is already in the report, but I only requested replacement and oversight, not a criminal referral. He appeared taken aback, perhaps even relieved. I added, I'm not here to ruin you. However, I also won't defend your shortcuts. Slowly he nodded. Then perhaps I should stop taking them. I opened the door of my car. I told Brandon, don't waste the second chance. There won't be another one for you. I wasn't followed by him. Wasn't the beggar arguing, simply watched me leave while keeping their arms crossed. And for once he appeared to be a man who had given up acting. The silence seemed to last longer than the brief flight back to Washington, D.C. I didn't play back the meeting, the altercation with my father, or even Brandon's eyes in the parking lot. There was only one thing on my mind, how nearly I resembled them exactly. The silence, the pride, the power. I closed my eyes, but a message vibrated on my phone before I could fall asleep. Richard Baines wants to have a private meeting, 5 p.m. M Street office is private. I was sitting in an executive suite with a glass wall and a view of the Potomac by 4:55 p.m. Sitting opposite me was Richard Baines. Take off your jacket. Ty relaxed the manner in which he spoke. Business is no longer the focus of this. He said, thank you for coming. Brewing tea rather than coffee. I saw it was deliberate. Confidential, you said. I answered. He grinned. Especially for you, but always. I arched an eyebrow. He leaned a little forward. Jade, let me ask you a question. Can you recall when you were first published Decentralized Response Firewalls paper? I blinked. Before I was even cleared, I wrote that in graduate school. I read it. Twice he said, are you aware of why I gave a headshake? Since the purpose of its writing was not to impress. It was composed for protection. After taking a sip of his tea, he went on. I could see something that most people missed even in those days. Being the smartest person in the room wasn't your goal. Even though no one thanked you, you were attempting to be the one who kept the room safe. I remained silent. He continued. Now it's quieter. Your dad is a very good tactician. Your brother has a lot of ambition. But you, he hesitated. You act as a guardian. You don't create noise to gain attention. You create impact in order to achieve outcomes. I asked for your assignment for that reason. Startled, I looked up. You took my name away. He gave a nod. When I noticed that Carter Tech was listed as a defense contract, I requested that they send the one person who wouldn't bat an eye and didn't know anyone in that building because I knew there would be conflict. The silence became heavier with the weight of that. He added, and I wasn't wrong. I felt seen for the first time in years, not as a rival, not as a daughter, not as a mandated agent wearing a badge, but as Jade, the person I became when no one was looking. What comes next? I inquired. He gave a shrug. Your final report is filed. Your suggestions will be carried out by someone else. What Brandon decides to do next will determine whether he succeeds or fails, as well as my family. I don't have jurisdiction over that, he said. However, I will tell you this. Now they are aware, despite their refusal to acknowledge it. I let out a slow breath, not contentment, not resolution. I was just holding air since I was 21. He got up and extended his hand. I turned to leave and shook it. He made one final statement. You didn't return to exact revenge. That's why it was successful. In that instant, I realized that power was not revealing my true self to them. She was becoming it, even though nobody thought I could. I took my time unpacking. I didn't have a lot. I had a laptop bag and 2 suitcases, but I wasn't in a rush anymore. It was a small studio apartment. Enough. 1 room for living. An old blue couch. Books that I had transported across state lines were stacked on shelves. Additionally, there was a small balcony that provided a peaceful view of Georgetown rooftops. I put down my chamomile tea mug and made my way to the window. Below, the city lights flickered, but they didn't call for notice the way the lights whispered by the Carter estate. They did not scream, but they shimmered. They served as a reminder that not all that is valuable needs to be the most conspicuous. 4 days had passed since the audit. I submitted the final report 3 days ago. I erased my father's last message 2 days ago. A voicemail that began loudly and ended quietly. And precisely 1 day after I became aware that I was no longer angry. I prepared dinner exclusively for myself that evening. No banquet tables, no caterers, there are no seating charts, basil-topped pasta, a red wine glass. From my phone, Miles Davis is playing low. Someone knocked halfway through the meal. I had no expectations. Nobody was ever what I expected. Carefully, I opened the door. A young woman was standing there with a manila folder clutched to her chest, like a security blanket, a government ID around her neck, and perhaps 22 dark-rimmed glasses. Carter agent, she inquired. I grinned. Yes, technically, but this is just Jade. She turned red. Apologies. The DC Cybersecurity Fellowship is where I'm from. I was instructed to personally deliver this to you. I grabbed the folder. It was a formal letter of invitation with my name on it. Your role as a lead mentor and program designer for our National Youth Encryption Initiative would be greatly appreciated. Before reading the second paragraph, I read the first one. Then I chuckled softly. Naturally, she appeared anxious. Is now not the appropriate moment? I gave a head shake. It's flawless. I simply didn't anticipate being viewed in this manner so quickly. She loosened her shoulders. Your Geneva paper was read by me. I joined this track for that reason. I felt like we belonged here because of you. I wasn't prepared for how hard that hit. I recognized myself in her not because she was flattering. She held onto that folder as if it were armor, the manner in which she stood at my door, uncertain of her welcome. I moved out of the way. Come in, I said. Walking around DC is not something you should do, without tea and with classified mail. An hour after leaving, she grinned as she entered the apartment. The folder arrived. They had a conversation. I took a seat by the window again after my nerves were calmed. There was no headline announcing my victory, no cheering, and no fanfare. Nevertheless, I felt satisfied, not only of sustenance, oxygen room, and potential. I considered Brandon, wondering if he would stand up or back down. I wondered if my father was finally coming to understand that love cannot be conditional and still be referred to as such. And for a brief moment, I considered Linda. I then opened a blank page in my journal and picked up the pen from my side table. I wrote at the top of it, I didn't return to get the house back. I returned to take back my identity. And I did. I then put the book away. There would be new work tomorrow, fresh perspectives to guide, new methods of protection without concealment. But this evening, I allowed myself to be motionless tonight. No codes, no titles, only Jade.